The night shift on the Galactic Union vessel was always quiet. The ship moved through the empty space between stars, carrying its precious cargo of diplomats and their families toward the outer colonies. Most of the crew was asleep. The lights in the corridors had dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting long shadows across the metal floors. Nurse was making her rounds in the nursery on Deck 4. She was a species that looked somewhat like the foxes of Earth, but with larger ears and softer fur. Her coat was well-groomed, and her amber eyes were sharp despite the late hour. She had been caring for the cubs for 3 years now, and she took great pride in her work. The nursery was a large room divided into sections for each species. Temperature controls kept different areas at different levels of warmth. Humidity was carefully managed. Even the lighting was adjusted for each group of young ones. The hatchlings needed warmer temperatures, while the pups preferred it cooler. The kits liked their area dim and cozy, filled with soft bedding they could burrow into. Walked past each section, checking on her charges. The larvae were floating in their tank of nutrient gel, their soft bodies pulsing gently as they slept. The 3 younglings were curled together in a heap of limbs and tails, making small chirping sounds in their dreams. Everything seemed peaceful. But something felt wrong. Stopped in the middle of the nursery and turned slowly, her large ears rotating to catch any sound. The room was too quiet. Usually there was always some small noise, a kit turning in its sleep, a hatchling making soft clicking sounds, the gentle hum of a pup dreaming. Tonight there was nothing. Walked quickly to the section. The bedding was there, arranged in neat piles just as she had left it. But the kits were gone, all 7 of them. Her heart began to beat faster. She moved to the section. Empty. The warming pads were still on, but the 6 hatchlings who should have been sleeping on them were nowhere to be seen. The section was the same, 4 pups missing. By the time had checked every section of the nursery, she was shaking. 23 cubs, all gone. Every single one of them had vanished. She ran to the communication panel on the wall and pressed the emergency button with trembling fingers. "Security to Deck 4, she said, her voice cracking. "All cubs are missing. I repeat, all cubs are missing from the nursery." The alarm that followed woke half the ship. Commander Al arrived at the nursery within minutes. He was one of the larger species in the Galactic Union. His body was covered in copper-colored scales that gleamed under the harsh emergency lights. He stood nearly 7 feet tall and had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face. 2 large arms hung at his sides, and 2 smaller arms were folded across his chest. Behind him came a team of security officers, their weapons drawn and their expressions tense. Parents began to arrive too, their faces showing the universal look of fear that came with a missing child. "Show me the recordings," Al ordered. Led him to the monitoring station and pulled up the footage from the past few hours. They watched together as the cubs slept peacefully in their sections. Then, around 2100 hours, something changed. The little ones began to stir, not all at once, but in a wave, as if some signal had passed through the room. One by one, they woke up. They looked around with wide eyes. Then they began to move. The footage showed the cubs gathering together in the center of the nursery. Different species, different sizes, different needs, but they moved as one group. The older ones helped the younger ones. A hatchling carried a larva in its arms. A kit guided 2 pups by nudging them with her nose. And then, together, they disappeared into an air vent in the far corner of the room. "How is this possible?" one of the parents cried out. "They are bobbies. They cannot plan something like this." "The vent was secured," a security officer said, confusion clear in his voice. "I checked it myself last week." Al stared at the frozen image on the screen, 23 cubs vanishing into the walls of his ship. This was not random behavior. This was coordinated. This was intentional. "Track them," he said. "Use thermal imaging, scent analysis, everything we have. Find out where they went." Lieutenant stepped forward. She was the ship's sensor specialist, another with fur so light it was almost white. Her ears were even larger than his, and her mind was even sharper. "I have already begun the trace, Commander," she said. "The cubs traveled through the ventilation system for approximately 40 minutes. They moved slowly but with purpose. There were several points where they could have exited, but they continued on. Where did they stop? Hesitated, her ears flattened against her head, a sign of nervousness among her kind. Deck 7, Commander, the human quarters. A murmur went through the crowd. The human quarters, of course. Everyone on the knew about the humans. They were a new species, only recently discovered by the Galactic Union. Their planet was classified as a death world, a place so hostile that the initial survey teams had been amazed anything could survive there at all. Earth, the humans called it, a world of extreme temperatures, violent weather, poisonous plants, and predators that seemed designed by some cruel god to hunt and kill. The humans themselves had evolved on this nightmare world, and they carried its marks on their bodies and minds. They were pursuit predators. Their ancient ancestors had hunted by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could run for hours without stopping. They could survive injuries that would kill most other species. Their bodies could repair themselves at rates that seemed almost magical. And they ate poison for fun. They deliberately consumed plants that caused pain, calling it spicy food. They drank beverages that damaged their internal organs and called it recreational drinking. They exposed themselves to harmful radiation from their own sun and called it getting a tan. The humans were, by any reasonable measure, absolutely terrifying. But they were also members of the Galactic Union now, at least on a probationary basis. And that meant they had the right to send representatives on diplomatic missions like this one. The 4 humans aboard they had been given quarters on Deck 7, far from the other passengers. It was not exactly segregation, but it was close. Most species preferred to keep their distance from the death. And now, apparently, every cub on the ship had decided to pay them a visit. Assemble a security team, Al ordered. We are going to Deck 7. The walk from the nursery to the human quarters took 15 minutes. Al used that time to review what he knew about the human delegation. Their senior officer was a man named Danny Marsh. He had served in his species' military for many years and had been selected for this mission because of his diplomatic skills. The reports described him as calm, intelligent, and surprisingly friendly for a predator species. His second-in-command was a young woman named Burroughs. She was new to interstellar travel and had spent most of the mission asking questions about everything she saw. Some crew members found her curiosity annoying. Others found it oddly endearing. The third human was Sam, their technical specialist. He was large even by human standards, with broad shoulders and thick arms. But he moved with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size, and he spoke so softly that other species often had to lean in to hear him. The fourth and final human was Dr. Lily Grant, their medical officer. She was older than the others, with lines around her eyes that her species apparently developed as they aged. She had answered more questions about human biology than anyone on the ship, always with patience and good humor. On paper, they seemed harmless enough, but Al knew better than to judge a species by 4 individuals. Humans were dangerous, everyone knew that. The question was, what had they done with the cubs? The security team gathered outside the door to the human quarters. 6 officers, all armed, all nervous. Al took a deep breath and pressed the door control. The door slid open, and Al stepped inside. He stopped immediately. The common room of the human quarters had been completely transformed. Every surface was covered with soft materials. Blankets of different colors and textures were spread across the floor. Pillows were stacked in corners. Cushions of various sizes formed little mountains and valleys throughout the room. The lighting had been dimmed to a warm golden glow, nothing like the harsh white lights of the rest of the ship. The temperature was warmer too, almost uncomfortably so for Al's physiology. And there, scattered across this soft landscape, were the cubs. All 23 of them. They were sleeping. Al had never seen anything like it. The cubs were not just asleep, they were deeply, peacefully, completely unconscious. Their small bodies were relaxed in ways he had rarely witnessed. Their breathing was slow and even. Some of them were even smiling if their species could smile. The kits had formed a pile in one corner, their fur blending together until it was hard to tell where one ended and another began. The hatchlings were sprawled on their backs, their bellies exposed in a gesture of absolute trust. The pups were nestled in a ring, their crystalline fur catching the warm light like scattered gems. Even the larvae, who needed constant moisture to survive, were sleeping contentedly in what appeared to be warm, wet towels. And in the middle of it all sat one of the humans. Dr. Lily Grant looked up at the security team with tired eyes. She had a kit cradled against her chest, its small body rising and falling with each breath. A hatchling was tucked under each of her arms. Her lap was full of pups. She raised one finger to her lips. "Please be quiet," she whispered. "I just got them to sleep." For a long moment, nobody moved. The security officers stood frozen in the doorway, their weapons hanging uselessly at their sides. What were they supposed to do? Open fire on a room full of sleeping bobbies. Al was the first to recover. He stepped carefully into the room, watching where he placed his feet to avoid stepping on any small bodies. "Dr. Grant," he said, keeping his voice low, "what is the meaning of this?" "They were scared," she said simply. "They came to us, we helped them calm down." "They came to you through the ventilation system, all 23 of them." "Yes," Dr. Grant shifted slightly, adjusting the sleeping kit against her chest. "I know it sounds strange, Commander. I was just as surprised as you are." Another human appeared from a side room. It was Burroughs, the young one with the red hair. She was carrying a tray with several cups of what smelled like some kind of hot drink. "Oh," she said when she saw the security team. "Hello, would you like some tea?" Al stared at her. "Tea?" "It is a human drink," explained. "Very soothing. I thought you might need it after all the excitement." Before Al could respond, Danny Marsh entered the room from another direction. The senior human officer looked as tired as Dr. Grant, but there was a calmness about him that Al found oddly reassuring. "Commander," Marsh said, "I think we should talk, but perhaps somewhere we will not wake the little ones." Al nodded slowly. He gestured for his security team to stand down and followed Marsh into the small kitchen area of the human quarters. "Explain," Al said once they were alone. "Explain how this happened." Marsh leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. It was a defensive posture for his species, Al knew, but also a thoughtful one. "It started about a week ago," Marsh began. "One of the kits found her way into our quarters through an air duct. We did not know how she got in at first. We just heard scratching in the walls, and then suddenly there was this little ball of fur sitting in the middle of our common room." "Why did you not return her immediately?" "We tried. We took her back to the nursery 3 times, but she kept coming back." Marsh shrugged. "We filed reports with the ship systems. Nobody responded. We assumed it was not considered a priority." Al made a mental note to have a conversation with whoever was supposed to be monitoring those reports. "So you let her stay?" "Not exactly. She let herself stay. Every night she would appear in our quarters. She would find whoever was awake and curl up next to them. At first we thought she was just curious about us. Humans must seem very strange to a species that has never seen one before." "You are strange to everyone," Al said dryly. Marsh smiled. It was a human expression that showed teeth, something that most species found threatening. But Al had learned to recognize it as a sign of friendliness among humans. "Fair enough," Marsh said. "Anyway, after the first kit came, others started to follow. First 1 or 2 more kits, then a hatchling, then a couple of pups. Every night there would be more of them." "And you did not think to alert anyone?" "We did. We filed 6 more reports. Still no response." Marsh's smile faded. "Commander, I do not know what is happening on this ship, but something is wrong. Those cubs were not just curious. They were frightened, and they came to us for protection." Al was silent for a moment. He did not want to admit it, but Marsh's words matched what he had seen on the nursery footage. The cubs had not been playing a game or exploring out of boredom. They had been fleeing. They had been seeking safety. But why would they seek safety with humans? Of all the species on the ship, why would they choose the one that every instinct should tell them to fear? "Tonight was different," Marsh continued. "Around 2100 hours, all of them came at once. We heard them coming through the vents, scratching, crying, making distress calls. When they came out, they were terrified. Whatever scared them before, it got worse tonight. Do you know what frightened them? Marsh shook his head. We have no idea, but whatever it is, we could not sense it. Human senses are different from most species. There are things we cannot smell, sounds we cannot hear. Whatever is bothering those cubs, it is outside our range. Al considered this. Humans had relatively poor senses compared to many species in the Galactic Union. Their hearing was limited, their sense of smell was weak, and their night vision was almost non-existent. It was possible that something was affecting the cubs that humans simply could not detect. Why did you not bring them back to the nursery? Al asked. Marsh's expression became serious. Because they did not want to go back. Commander, I know you do not have much experience with humans, but there is something you need to understand about our species. We are very, very protective of children. All children. It does not matter what species they are. When we see a frightened child, every instinct we have tells us to protect them. Even children that are not your own. Especially children that are not our own. On Earth, we have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It means that caring for young ones is not just the job of the parents. It is the job of everyone. Al did not know how to respond to this. In culture, cubs were the responsibility of their parents and close family. The idea of taking on the care of someone else's offspring was almost unthinkable. But as he looked back into the common room at the peaceful faces of the sleeping cubs, he could not deny what he was seeing. These children had been terrified. Now they were calm. They had sought out the humans not because they had been tricked or captured, but because they had felt safe. Somehow, these death-world predators had made 23 frightened cubs feel safe. Lieutenant appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her in hand. Commander, she said, I have found something. She led him back to the common room, where the other humans had gathered around the sleeping cubs. Sam was gently adjusting the blankets around a group of pups, tucking them in with careful movements of his large hands. Burroughs was singing softly to a fussing hatchling, her voice low and melodic. Showed Al her. I ran a full diagnostic on the environmental systems for Deck 4. There has been a malfunction in the atmospheric processor for the nursery. It has been releasing small amounts of a chemical compound into the air. What kind of compound? It is a byproduct of the ship's fuel processing system. Normally, it is filtered out before it reaches any occupied areas, but the filter failed approximately 10 days ago. The compound has been building up in the nursery ever since. Is it dangerous? Not to adults. The concentration is too low to cause any harm to fully developed individuals, but for juveniles, ears drooped. The compound triggers stress responses in developing nervous systems, fear, anxiety, panic. The cubs have been experiencing constant low-level terror for over a week. Al felt his scales flush with anger. His nursery had been slowly poisoning the cubs in his care, and no one had noticed. No one except the cubs themselves. Why did they not come to us? He asked. Why did they not go to their parents or to the nursery staff? I believe I have an answer to that as well, said. The compound is undetectable to most adult species. We literally cannot smell it or sense it in any way. The cubs could not communicate what was wrong because they did not understand it themselves. They only knew that they felt afraid. And the humans, also unable to detect the compound, but the cubs did not go to them because they could explain what was happening. They went because... Paused, her ears flicking nervously. Commander, there have been studies, classified studies conducted by Union biologists, about the effect humans have on other species. What kind of effect? A calming one, brought up another set of data on her pad. Human bodies produce a combination of heat, sound, and chemical signals that seem to trigger protective responses in other species. Their heartbeats are slow and steady. Their body temperature is higher than most species, making them feel warm and safe to touch. They even emit subtle pheromones that reduce stress hormones in nearby organisms. Al stared at her. You are telling me that humans are naturally soothing to other species? Yes, Commander. The theory is that this evolved as a survival mechanism on their death world. Humans are social creatures. They needed to form bonds with other species to survive. So they developed traits that made other creatures instinctively trust them. Al looked back at the common room. Dr. Grant was still sitting in the middle of the sleeping cubs, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. But she had not moved. She had not tried to put down the kid in her arms or shake off the hatchlings pressed against her sides. She was simply there, warm and still and present. Like a living blanket of safety. The cubs sensed something was wrong in the nursery, Al said slowly. They could not explain it to us because we could not detect it, so they went looking for the safest place they could find. And they found the humans finished. The repair of the atmospheric processor took several hours. While the engineering team worked, the cubs remained in the human quarters. Their parents came to check on them, one by one, and each time they left looking slightly dazed. "She is sleeping," a mother said, staring at her kit with wonder. "She has not slept through the night in 10 days. I thought something was wrong with her. I thought I was doing something wrong." "It was not your fault," Dr. Grant assured her. "None of you could have known." By morning, the problem had been fixed. The nursery air was clean again. The cubs could go home. But they did not want to. When the parents tried to collect their children, the cubs clung to the humans with surprising strength. The kits buried themselves in Sam's lap. The hatchlings wrapped their tails around Sam's arms. The pups pressed themselves against Dr. Grant and refused to let go. "This is ridiculous," a father said, trying to pry his hatchling loose from Sam's grip. "You are not even the same species." Sam looked at him with calm eyes. "Does that matter?" The father stopped. He looked at his child, at the peaceful expression on the hatchling's face, at the way its small claws were tangled in the fabric of Sam's shirt. "No," he said finally, "I suppose it does not." In the end, a compromise was reached. The cubs would sleep in the nursery during the day when the staff could watch them. But in the evenings, they would be allowed to visit the human quarters for what had started calling quiet time. It was an unusual arrangement. It was probably against several regulations, but Commander Al approved it anyway. He told himself it was for the good of the cubs. He told himself it was a practical solution to a unique problem. He told himself a lot of things. But the truth was simpler than that. He had seen the way those cubs slept in the human quarters. He had seen the peace on their faces, the trust in their small bodies. And he had realized something that changed everything he thought he knew about humans. They were not just death-world predators. They were not just survival machines built to endure a hostile planet. They were something more, something that the Galactic Union had never encountered before. They were caretakers. The weeks that followed were strange ones aboard the evening visits to the human quarters became a regular event. Every night, around 2,000 hours, a parade of small bodies would make its way through the corridors of Deck 7, kits hopping along on their back legs, hatchlings waddling with their tails held high, pups trotting in their crystalline coats. Even the larvae had special carriers made so they could join the procession. The crew members who witnessed this nightly migration did not know what to make of it. Some found it amusing, others found it unsettling. A few found it touching in ways they could not quite explain. The human quarters had been permanently modified to accommodate the visitors. The common room now had a permanent installation of soft bedding. Temperature controls had been adjusted to create different zones for different species. A small humidifier had been added for the larvae. And the humans themselves had become something no one had expected. They had become den mothers, den fathers. They had become the center of a small, strange family. Danny Marsh, the senior officer, had developed a talent for bedtime stories. He would sit in the corner of the room with cubs gathered around him and tell tales from Earth's mythology. He adjusted them, of course, removing the violence and adding happy endings. But the cubs loved them anyway. "And so the little rabbit outsmarted the wolf," he would say, his voice low and rhythmic, "and went home to his family, and they all lived happily ever after." The cubs would sigh and settle deeper into their bedding. They did not understand all the words, but they understood the tone. They understood that this was a story about being small and clever and safe. Burroughs had discovered that human singing had a powerful effect on the cubs. Her voice was not particularly beautiful by human standards, but to the cubs it was magical. Something about the frequency, the rhythm, the gentle rise and fall of the melody, it made them drowsy within minutes. She had started with human lullabies, songs about moons and stars and bobbies in cradles. But she had also begun learning songs from other species, adapting them for her human voice. The parents had taught her a traditional kit-soothing chant. They had shared their hatchling hymns. One night she sang a melody that she had learned from one of the pups' mothers. The sound was strange coming from a human throat, but the pups had responded immediately. They had pressed closer to her, their crystalline fur glowing softly in the dim light. "How do you do that?" the mother had asked, watching through the doorway. "My voice does not calm them like yours does." Had looked at her with genuine confusion. "I do not know, I just sing." Sam had become the architect of what the cubs called the Blanket Mountain. Every evening, he would construct an elaborate fortress of pillows and blankets in the center of the room. The design changed every night, but the purpose was always the same: to create a cozy, enclosed space where the cubs could pile together. For all his size, Sam was incredibly gentle. His large hands could hold the smallest kit without any risk of harm. His broad chest made an excellent pillow for multiple cubs at once, and his deep, soft voice seemed to resonate at a frequency that made young ones of all species relax. "You are very good with them," a father said one evening, watching Sam tuck a youngling into a particularly comfortable spot. Sam smiled, a gentle expression that transformed his stern face. "I have nieces and nephews back home, 7 of them, I miss them." "Is that why you do this? Because you miss your own families young?" Sam considered the question for a moment. "Partly, but also because they needed someone, and we were here." It was Dr. Lily Grant, however, who had become the true heart of the evening ritual. The cubs sought her out above all the other humans. They climbed into her lap without asking. They fell asleep against her chest as if she were their own mother. They trusted her in a way that seemed almost impossible given the vast differences between their species. One evening, Commander Al came to observe the quiet time. He stood in the doorway, watching as the cubs settled into their nightly routine. Dr. Grant was in her usual spot, surrounded by small bodies. "Doctor," he said softly, "may I ask you something?" She looked up at him, a hatchling drooling slightly on her shoulder. "Of course, Commander." "You have your own offspring, 2 daughters according to your file. They are far away, back on Earth. You have not seen them in many months." He paused. "Does this not make it painful, caring for the children of others when you cannot be with your own?" Dr. Grant was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with an emotion Al could not quite identify. "Yes," she said, "it is painful. Every day I think about my girls. I wonder what they are doing. I wonder if they miss me. I wonder if they will even remember me by the time I get home." "Then why do you do this?" She looked down at the hatchling on her shoulder, at the kid in her lap, at all the small lives that had somehow become her responsibility. "Because they need me," she said simply, "and because caring for them makes the pain easier to bear. It reminds me that there is good in the universe, that children everywhere deserve to be loved and protected, that being a mother is not just about biology. It is about choosing every day to put someone else's needs before your own." She met Al's eyes, and he saw something in her gaze that he had never seen in a human before. Not the predator's focus, not the survivor's wariness, something softer, something warmer. "My daughters have their father," she said. "They have grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. They have a whole village of people who love them, but these cubs, tonight on this ship in this room, they have me. And that is enough." Al did not know what to say. He stood there for a long moment, watching the cubs sleep, watching Dr. Grant breathe, watching the impossible scene before him. Then he nodded, turned, and walked away. He had a report to write. The word spread through the ship, slowly at first, then faster. The humans were looking after the cubs. The humans had become babysitters. The Death were running a nursery. Reactions were mixed. Some crew members were horrified. They pointed to the humans' classification, their evolutionary history, their documented capabilities for violence. They warned that it was only a matter of time before something went wrong, before the predator instincts took over, before the cubs got hurt. But the cubs kept coming back. Night after night, they made their pilgrimage to Deck 7. Night after night, they returned to their parents calm and well-rested and happy. Other crew members were curious. They started to visit the human quarters during quiet time, standing in the doorway to watch. What they saw confused them, challenged them, made them question everything they thought they knew. A few crew members started asking questions. They approached the humans during the day, in the corridors, in the mess hall, in the common areas. They wanted to understand. "Why do you do this?" a young ensign asked one afternoon. "The cubs are not your responsibility. You gain nothing from caring for them." Looked at her with genuine puzzlement. "We gain everything from caring for them. We gain purpose. We gain connection. We gain love. But they are not your species." "So what?" shrugged, a human gesture that meant dismissal or acceptance or both. "They are children. That is all that matters." The ensign walked away, shaking her head. But the next night she came to observe quiet time, and the night after that, and the night after that. By the end of the second week, she was helping arrange the bedding. Dr. Grant began receiving requests for consultations. Parents wanted to know how the humans calmed their cubs so effectively. They wanted to learn the techniques. They wanted to understand the magic. "There is no magic," Dr. Grant would say again and again. "There is only presence. You have to be there. You have to be still. You have to let them know, through your body and your voice and your touch, that they are safe." "But how do you make them feel safe?" "By feeling safe yourself. Children sense fear. They sense anxiety. They sense tension. If you want them to relax, you have to relax first." It sounded simple. It was not. Many of the parents tried to implement Dr. Grant's advice. Some succeeded, others struggled, though in particular found it difficult. Their culture valued strength and vigilance. The idea of letting down their guard, even with their own hatchlings, went against everything they had been taught. But Commander Al noticed something. The parents who spent time observing quiet time, who watched the humans interact with the cubs, began to change. They became calmer, more patient, more present. The humans were not just taking care of the cubs. They were teaching the parents how to take care of them too. Halfway through the third week, something unexpected happened. An adult asked to join quiet time. His name was, and he was one of the ship's engineers. He was young for his position, barely into his adult years, and he had no cubs of his own. But he had been watching the evening migration for days, and something about it had captured his attention. "I do not know why," he told Danny Marsh, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I do not understand what happens in there, but I want to know. I want to feel it." Marsh looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "Find a spot, be still." Entered the room hesitantly. The cubs looked at him with curiosity but without fear. He was not their parent, he was not their caretaker, but he was not a threat either. He found an empty corner and sat down, folding his legs beneath him. For a long time, nothing happened. He simply sat there, watching the humans work their strange magic. Then a kit wandered over to him. She was one of the youngest, barely weaned. Her fur was fluffy, and her eyes were huge in her small face. She looked at with an expression that he could not read. Then she climbed into his lap and fell asleep. Froze, he had never held a cub before. He had never wanted to. He had always assumed that caring for young ones was something other people did, something that had nothing to do with him. But now there was a kid in his lap, warm and soft and trusting, and something inside him shifted. He looked up at Dr. Grant, who was watching him with a knowing smile. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Nothing," she said. "Just be there." So he was. When quiet time ended and the cubs went home with their parents, the kitten's lap woke up and looked at him one more time. Then she scampered away to join her family. Sat in the empty room for a long time after everyone else had gone. "What happened to you?" his bunkmate asked him later that night. could not explain it. He did not have the words, but he knew that something had changed inside him, something had opened, something had grown. "I held a kit," he said finally, "and it was the most important thing I have ever done." His bunkmate stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Maybe he had, but did not care. He went back to quiet time the next night, and the night after that, and every night until the mission ended. The news of what was happening aboard began to spread beyond the ship. Messages were sent to friends and family on other vessels and stations. Reports were filed with various authorities. Rumors circulated through the network of traders and travelers who moved between the stars. By the fourth week, they had become famous. Scientists wanted to study the phenomenon. Psychologists wanted to understand it. Politicians wanted to use it. Everyone had an opinion about the humans and their cubs and what it all meant for the future of the Galactic Union. Commander Al found himself fielding calls from admirals and ambassadors and experts of every kind. They all had questions. They all had theories. They all wanted access. He turned most of them away. "The cubs are not specimens to be studied," he told one particularly persistent researcher. "They are children. They deserve privacy and peace." "But the implications, Commander, the scientific value, the diplomatic potential." "I do not care." Al cut the connection without another word. He was becoming protective. He knew it. He could not seem to stop it. Something about watching those cubs sleep, about seeing the trust in their small faces, had changed him. He was no longer just the commander of a ship. He was the guardian of something fragile and precious and new. And he would not let anyone threaten it. The human delegation noticed the change in him. Danny Marsh mentioned it one evening, during a rare moment when the cubs were settled and the adults could talk. "You have been different lately, Commander," Marsh said. "More present, more involved." Al grunted. It was not a denial. "May I ask what changed?" Al was silent for a long moment. He watched the cubs sleep, watched the humans move among them, watched the peaceful scene that had become so familiar. "I have commanded many ships," he said finally. "I have overseen many missions. I have been responsible for thousands of lives, but this," he gestured at the room around them, "this is different. This matters in a way that other things do not. Because it is about the children. Partly, but also because it is about trust. These cubs chose to come here. They chose to trust your people, despite everything that should have told them to fear you. And your people chose to care for them despite having no obligation to do so." He turned to look at Marsh directly. "That kind of trust, that kind of care, it is rare, it is precious, it must be protected." Marsh nodded slowly. "In my culture, we call it sacred." Sacred, Al tasted the word. It felt strange on his tongue, but it felt right. "Yes," he said, "sacred." The mission was scheduled to end in 2 more weeks. They would dock at Union Station, the diplomats would disembark, and everyone would go their separate ways. The humans would return to Earth. The cubs would go home with their families, and quiet time would become just a memory. The cubs did not understand this. They were too young to comprehend schedules and destinations and endings. All they knew was that their humans were here now, and that was enough. But the adults understood, and as the final days approached, a heaviness settled over the ship. Everyone could feel it. The end was coming. Dr. Grant felt it most of all. Each evening, when the cubs came to her, she held them a little. Each night, when they fell asleep against her, she stayed a little longer. "You will miss them," Commander Al said one evening, observing from his usual spot in the doorway. "Yes," her voice was thick, "more than I can say. You could stay. There are positions on Union vessels for medical officers. You could continue this work." She shook her head slowly. "My daughters need me. I have been away too long already. It is time to go home." Al understood. He did not like it, but he understood. "The cubs will remember you," he said. "What you have done here, it will stay with them. It will shape who they become." Dr. Grant smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "And they will shape who I become. That is how it works, Commander. Love changes everyone it touches. Everyone." On the final night before the ship reached Union Station, The humans threw a party. It was not a big party. Just the human delegation, the cubs, and a few of the adults who had become regulars at quiet time. But it was perfect. There was food, adapted for different species' needs. There was music, a mix of human songs and melodies from half a dozen worlds. There was dancing, or at least the clumsy, joyful movement that passed for dancing when the participants included creatures with 4 legs, 2 legs, no legs, and everything in between. And there was love. It filled the room like a physical presence. It wrapped around everyone there. It made the final hours feel less like an ending and more like a beginning. When the party wound down and the cubs began to yawn, the humans carried them to their beds one last time. They tucked in the blankets. They sang the lullabies. They whispered the goodbyes that the cubs would not remember. And then they sat in the quiet room, surrounded by sleeping children, and simply existed. Together, for the last time. The next morning, they docked at Union Station. The passengers began to disembark. Luggage was loaded and unloaded. Farewells were exchanged. The cubs clung to their humans until the very last moment. The kits wrapped themselves around legs. The hatchlings refused to let go of Sam's hands. The pups pressed against Dr. Grant with their small bodies and would not move. In the end, the parents had to carry them away. Dr. Grant watched them go, one by one, until the corridor was empty and the door was closed and she was alone with her team. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Danny Marsh put his hand on her shoulder. "You did good," he said. "We all did good." She nodded. She could not trust her voice. They gathered their belongings and made their way to the airlock. The shuttle to Earth would leave in an hour. They had just enough time. But when they reached the airlock, they found Commander Al waiting for them. He stood at attention, his 4 eyes fixed on the humans. His expression was unreadable, but something about his posture suggested deep emotion. "Commander," Marsh said, surprised, "we did not expect to see you here." "I wanted to say goodbye," Al said, "properly." He stepped forward and extended his upper right hand, the gesture of respect between equals. Marsh took it without hesitation. "What you have done on this ship," Al said, "it will not be forgotten. I will make sure of that." "We did not do anything special," said. "We just took care of kids who needed us." Al turned to look at her. That is exactly what made it special. He shook hands with each of the humans in turn. When he reached Dr. Grant, he paused. "Doctor," he said, "I have filed my report on the human delegation. It recommends your species for immediate elevation to full membership in the Galactic Union." Dr. Grant blinked. "Commander, that is very kind, but we are just 4 people. We do not represent all of humanity." "No, but you showed us what humanity can be." Al's voice was gruff but genuine. "You showed us that the measure of a species is not in how dangerous it can be, but in how gentle it chooses to be. You could have ignored those frightened cubs. You could have sent them away. Instead, you made them your own." He stepped back and came to attention again. "On behalf of the Galactic Union vessel," he said formally, "I thank you for your service, and on behalf of myself, I thank you for teaching me something I did not know I needed to learn." The humans boarded their shuttle in silence. They strapped into their seats and watched through the viewports as Union Station grew smaller behind them. None of them spoke until Earth appeared on the horizon, a blue and green jewel against the black of space. Then Dr. Grant sighed and closed her eyes. "Do you think we will ever see them again?" asked. "The cubs, I mean." Dr. Grant did not answer for a long moment. She thought about tiny kits and copper-scaled hatchlings and crystalline pups. She thought about warm weight in her arms and small bodies pressed against her chest. She thought about trust and love and the sacred act of caring for something fragile. "I do not know," she said finally, "but I know we will remember them, and they will remember us, and maybe, somewhere in the galaxy, that memory will make a difference." She opened her eyes and looked out at Earth, growing larger with every passing moment. Maybe that is enough. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere. The sky turned from black to blue. The clouds parted to reveal continents and oceans and all the familiar shapes of home. And somewhere far behind them, on a station orbiting a distant sun, 23 cubs woke up in their own beds and looked around for humans who were no longer there. They did not understand why they felt sad. They were too young to understand concepts like goodbye or distance or loss. All they knew was that something warm and safe had been here, and now it was gone. But something else remained, a memory, a feeling, a sense that they had been loved by creatures who owed them nothing. It was a seed. And seeds, given time, grow into something wonderful. Years later, when those cubs were grown, they would tell stories to their own children. Stories about the strange, hairless aliens who had taken them in. Stories about warmth and songs and blanket mountains. Stories about the time they were scared, and the universe sent them exactly what they needed. And their children would grow up knowing that somewhere among the stars, there was a species called humans. A species that came from a death world. A species that could be dangerous beyond measure. But also a species that could love without limit, that could protect without question, that could choose gentleness over strength every single time. And when those children were old enough to travel the stars themselves, they sought out humans wherever they found them. They offered friendship and partnership and trust. Because once, long ago, their parents had slept in human arms. And that made all the difference in the universe. The end.